Hello, and thank you for tuning in to the Flatirons Syndicate Motorsports Podcast. This show is brought to you by Flatirons Tuning, your source for any aftermarket or OEM Subaru parts. Be sure to check out our store at flatironstuning.com and stay tuned with Flatirons Tuning. Right. There is a time and a place for everything. And a main Facebook page is not usually one of them.
But it's where you get the most real. That's where I get my news from on Rally.
And then you know to go.
I scroll through Max Tech Teens, and I'm like, oh shit! And then I go to the normal Facebook page. I'm like, oh, okay, cool.
Okay.
So it's
that brings you up to speed, and then you're like, oh, this is what's going on.
Well, something's happening. I need to figure out what it is.
Yeah. Because I'm really kind of just Rally adjacent, so I really don't always keep up with what's going on.
Well, there's a lot of stuff going on. It's hard to.
There's a lot of stuff going on.
Keep on top of it.
Podcast 420.
That's right.
Let's talk about it.
All right.
Get slow, and then I just put something out.
Technical bulletin. All cars must drive upside down.
Don't worry, that's going to next week. So
it's been really boring. What can I do to stir the pot?
Pretty much.
Mm-hmm. Well, all right. Let's kick this off. So, welcome back everybody to the Flatirons Syndicate Podcast. In the shop here, we got Tasso and special guest. We got Mr. Preston Osborn, the competition director of the ARA, with us. And first, Preston, thank you so much for coming down, and Tasso, glad you could actually kind of help facilitate this, because you two were kind of talking about other things. And Preston,
typically it's Tasso complaining about the rules to me.
Yep.
I was going to say talking about other things, but yeah. I mean, rules are often a point of discussion.
Absolutely.
But Preston, you had seen kind of what we were talking about, the new rally car that Vermont Sports Cars built for Subaru, and I guess you kind of mentioned like, hey, I'd be willing to come on and talk about that. And geez, how could we say no to that? Like that's I honestly thought about reaching out, but I figured initially that like it would be maybe a little bit too touchy of a subject to really kind of bring you in on, and so for you to be willing to discuss it, had to bring you in, and very excited to kind of pick your brain on and see what your perspective is on the whole thing. So maybe just as a place to start, with the rules change, like this is the first year with the rules change, that is where this new car has come from. How's it going so far? What are your thoughts so far this season?
Yeah, it's tough because anything you measure against Subaru, they're a factory team, right? And you guys touched on when you talked before, car aside, just the effort that a team is able to put on from a driver, crew, even testing and things like that are going to be tough. So for me, we have pretty powerful tools at our disposal to, like Rally Safe and some of the other data that I get, where I can kind of extrapolate some of the vehicle performance compared to, of course, years past, and then also with the Rally 2 cars that we have in the series, and help guide our decisions. For me, I'm a data junkie, and so I'm never going to make any decision or any change or anything like that without having some usable set of data to look at.
Okay.
And, so looking at this year, the changes to the rules did what we expected from, say, an acceleration and top speed and all of those metrics. So now it's the fine-tuning, right? And I think it's been hard for us to really have a good comparison against what Brandon and the Subaru are doing versus, say, a true comparison against a top-level Rally 2 car. So, we've got a couple of pretty good Rally 2 drivers, here in the U.S., but looking at, say, the performance of Brandon over the last 3 years, he's ramped up pretty quickly. And the performance that he's getting out of the previous Subaru now, I've only got one race worth of data for this one. He's competing at a high level. And so, we're really trying to push and find a way to get good car-to-car comparison for those.
Sure. With it being such a big change to the rules, and this being the first year, and knowing that there's only one factory team, even that factory team has been able to produce one car. I mean, one of the things that I've seen mentioned is just, well, there's nobody else running in the class. Is that in some ways not surprising, just because the rules are different, and you're figuring it's going to take a little bit of time for other teams to kind of get a car to fit into the class? Like, are you expecting there to be more cars in 24, 25?
Yeah, there's a couple of different reasons for the rule changes. First off, as a fan of the sport, it's hard to new to race cars, but they're getting very fast, and so we have to look at it from that perspective as well, not only from a competition standpoint, but also from a safety standpoint. I would say the competition side of it was more of the driving factor than safety for these changes. But it was still one of those, when I'm looking at the speeds that those cars, when they had so much aero on them, are capable of doing, it's tough. And I'll tell you, even had some private conversations with some of those competitors going, we're obviously going to race as fast as we can, but this is sketchy. And so, having those conversations from some of these top level drivers, I don't want to necessarily say it's eye-opening, but it was reaffirming to hear that from them, just because we had already, 3 years ago is really when we first started talking about these changes that we had this year.
Okay.
And yeah, so pushing those changes, it's also for two things on the competition side. We want the Rally 2 cars to be relevant at the top of the sport here in the U.S. They're homologated, so they can't make changes, and so we want kind of the performance level of the Rally 2 car to be very similar to the open car. So that was part of the change. And then, also we wanted it so if one were to want to build an open car, that it's a bit more attainable to do that. I say attainable, a little more tongue-in-cheek. Someone's not going to build it in their garage, but having talked to other professional level teams, things like aerodynamics are exceptionally expensive for a relatively small return, and with how advanced they were getting in our series, it was completely discouraging for people. So.
Still pretty advanced though right now, right? Like looking at Subaru's build series on YouTube, they're talking about working with composites in Europe and all sorts of I'm spacing on the computer.
CFD programming.
CFD programming. I don't know why.
Yeah.
But so it's there's still quite a high aerodynamic benchmark set, right?
Yes, but there gets to be a certain point of rate of return. Okay. And with us being much more restrictive on the changes you can make to the bodywork, yes, you can do some tricks in a couple places here and there, but it's much different than when every surface of the car is pretty much open and fair game.
And what you're talking about there is that now do you define it as the silhouette or the appearance, like basically has to fall within like the silhouette of the factory car? So like you can't put as big a rear wing and
so
big
really
extra elements.
The best way to talk about it is our previous rules, were telling you what you couldn't do. So it's pretty much you could do whatever you want except for these things.
Okay.
We flipped that on its head and said you can't do anything other than these exceptions. And so we really want, again, following the Rally 2 format or template, if you will, it's you have to have OEM bodywork except for these things. So things like widening of the fenders is allowed because you can widen the track with the bit, and obviously you need to make modifications to the fenders just for travel, with how much travel these cars have, and so things like that. Front bumper needs to be pretty much factory. And that was actually, you hear them talk about it in their series, we had some back and forth with them on it because some of their initial requests to us just weren't really within the spirit of what we wanted, and were too far of a departure from that OEM look to a bumper.
Okay.
So.
Well, if you're a privateer and that like there's maybe 4 or 5 areas that you can look at making a change, and exactly, it's spelled into the rules exactly where they are. That would make it easier to kind of figure something out or try something out.
The rule book that myself and Doug, our technical director, inherited, as Tasso knows, is pretty ambiguous in a lot of places. And so it's been a pretty big challenge to kind of take that, and we've blown up significant portions of it and tried to do a better job of defining or redefining things or setting those guidelines. Just so, yes, it keeps the top teams kind of more in check, but also for a privateer building a car, they don't show up to tech and go, wait, I can't do that?
Right. Sure.
Yeah, to lend some insight to that, because it's twice now we've kind of mentioned a lot of the communication that Preston and I do is kind of in the rules understanding and interpreting kind of side of stuff. Because obviously, like I've mentioned before, I haven't done all that much stage rally, and at the moment I'm kind of not doing any of it, just due to the kind of the cost and barrier of entry. But for the hill climb stuff, I'm the rally class rep, and so a large part of that is working with our rule book every off season, along with people's racer submitted rule changes, and then interpreting and making sure the cars that show up are actually kind of good to go. And so a lot of that, like the discussion that especially over the last off season Preston and I had, was that a lot of the rules, the way that were worded before and saying, before they were flipped on their head, it left a lot of room open for interpretation, to the point where we had essentially a front half and back half tube chassis car show up to the hill climb saying, I could ARA this if I wanted to, why can't I compete in this series? And the way, I have I can turn on a really objective part of my brain for rules interpreting and stuff like that, which is part cynicism, part sarcasm, and part objectivity.
Yeah.
But the way I was reading it, I was like, Preston, I think this car would meet. And Preston's like, no, it wouldn't. There's no way it would, right? And Doug's, no way.
Floors,
right? Yeah. And so, the conversation was, what is a floor, essentially? And so,
wow, that seems existential almost.
What is the
that's
floor?
The
right?
rules conversation that I have to have, though.
Right. And it's a really difficult
what
thing.
What is a floor? What defines like a factory car or a factory chassis?
So now we have a paragraph under everywhere it talks about like what is the silhouette or I forget, it's not the silhouette, it's the profile. Yeah. What's the profile of a pillar, B pillar, C pillar? What constitutes a floor? What modifications to the floor? We even put in a spirit of the rule clause for like the unibody's strength is factored into the design of the cage, so don't make modifications that compromise that kind of strength. And so it's the rules writing and then interpreting, and then everyone will always try and push, even at I would argue hill climbing is the grassroots of all grassroots of motorsports, at least in this area. I mean, short of maybe SCCA Rallycross or something like that, our budgets are slightly higher than your average Rallycross person, maybe, but not by much. And even at this level, people are still pushing and innovating. And I do it too with aerodynamic devices, because for me, that's one of the cheap places, even if it's a relatively low cost or a benefit, I can go buy some plastic and angle iron and just rivet it to the car and make it into a shape, and it's not CFD'd, it's not wind tunnel tested.
It probably does something,
but it's like YouTube engineered.
A dirt road is nature's wind tunnel.
Yeah,
you
exactly.
Still see everything coming off the back of the car. Right. Like, this is spiraling.
Yeah, look at all the dusty pictures of the car from events to be like, oh, there is a vortex coming off that. That's pretty sweet.
And now you know why the SCCA rulebook's 800 pages.
Yeah, dude, and so that I got a taste of that then looking at when I thought I was going to build a spec Miata a couple years ago. And holy smokes, that class. And so that's a class that essentially allows like 5 modifications. And you're still having to pour through 2 different rule books depending on whether you want to run, SCCA or NASA and stuff like that. So I'm, Preston and I even still are having conversations somewhat regularly about, what constitutes the structure of a door, right?
Right.
The ARA requires the crash structure to remain in the door. Is that how it's worded? The Hill Climb series does not. Are we okay with that? Is that
right?
Is it just an omission in the rule book? Will it come up later? It's the rules wars.
And we start talking about like door foam and things like that too. And I think the other thing for you is I'm fortunate enough to be in a position where I've got a lot of contacts in the industry.
Yeah, you are my contacts.
Right. So one of the door foams you asked me about, I had no idea what it was or no experience with. But I happen to know the head of the SFI, and so I can call him and say, hey, tell me about this. And I was able to get him some information, since it was something he was looking at.
And it's invaluable for me. I can't imagine, in my little pocket of the world, how deep it gets sometimes. I can't imagine, a national series. I like to talk trash on this podcast and have fun and all sorts of stuff like that, right? But like reality, brass tacks kind of to that thing. Like I'm very sympathetic to your cause.
Yeah.
Well, it's cool that motorsports, especially rally, is a small community in playing. I guess in a big pond. It's like you get to know a few people, and all of a sudden there's a lot of connections that open up for sure.
That's when you learn it is only a few people.
Right. That's true.
Right.
That's true.
Right. And news travels fast. So
right.
Nothing happens in a vacuum in this community. So.
Yeah. Well, from a rule standpoint, it seems like you have 2 opposing considerations, which is one is safety, and then the other one is like the performance of the car, maybe keeping the class as close reasonably as you can if you're establishing a class, and that's kind of what you're up against. Would you say that, like, have you been getting calls from, Rally 2 teams from Europe, other people that are like looking at building a car? Like, has it sparked interest in building a car for this top class? Do you think it's worked that way?
It has. I think the tough thing is I've had quite a few conversations with some, very top level teams. coming from all different parts of the world. And the interest is there, but they're scared of Subaru. And I frankly, I don't blame them, because they've been the dominant factor in this sport for how long. And while they have been great working with us, when transparently we told them, we got to slow you down and make the series relevant to other people, their job's still to build a race car to win, right? And so there's always going to be that balance on their end, but from our end, it's trying to entice more of those teams. And I think the struggle, especially when we talk about writing rules or even direction, is, my direction with the national championship and kind of the top competitors is very different than taking care of the grassroots side of it. And so there always has to be the consideration of, making changes, transparently directed at the national competitors and how it's going to affect those grassroots guys.
Right.
The restrictor change we made this year is a perfect example. So we had a 36 millimeter restrictor permitted for the limited class for the last few years, and I think it was 22 pounds of boost. And they were making most of the well-built ones that I saw, like 425 foot-pounds of torque and like 380 horsepower.
Wow.
To the wheels.
That's almost what my unrestricted car made.
Right. But when you start throwing high compression stuff and decent head work, and like you said, no matter the series, someone's going to try and build to the extent of the rules.
Well, it's the thing also, like I've always said, restrictors don't make slower cars; they make more expensive cars.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
Yeah.
Within reason.
To a point, right? Yeah. But
and so we saw very clearly we had to make a change for this limited class. One of our competitors, Texas Dave, he had a decently well-built car, and he's a good driver, and he was hitting similar or sometimes higher top speeds than the Subaru and Barry's car.
Wow.
Just because his restrictor was so much larger. And so when you get into those wide open areas, that's where the advantage is going to be. He's got a little bit more engine, as far as size goes, and a bigger restrictor. So we had to make that change. We went to a 33 millimeter restrictor because we kind of worked our way backwards and said, what are our power targets? What's the power to weight ratio that we're trying to hit? And that's effectively where the math ended up.
I think at this point it would be worth talking, because you said once you saw the speed that Texas State was hitting, you had to make a change. I'm guessing that when you say that you have to do that, it's not even necessarily from a competition standpoint, it's more from a safety standpoint.
Yeah, that one was more safe.
And so maybe just give us a little insight in, just from a safety standpoint, what are kind of the standards that you guys are trying to see as an event runs across the classes, and why something like that top speed would then prompt you to go, okay, this is something that we need to rein in.
It's always a certain measurement of risk, and that is the most boring side of my job, but also the one arguably with the most consequence. And so for us, top speed is something we look at, but not necessarily a huge concern. It's sustained speeds and, what are they cornering at? And when we're talking about the open cars and their aerodynamics, their cornering speed shot up pretty quickly. But when we're talking about the limited cars, trying to slow those down overall, we kind of had to take a couple of different approaches. It was the restrictor, but also road selection. Some of the stages that the events are using are very fast, and that's something that needs to be addressed. And that one not only from a safety, but you wouldn't expect even from a competition side, because if it's an open, fast road, your guys at the top level, whether it's the top limited drivers or the top open guys, they're all going to be flat. They all will trust their notes. They all know how to drive a corner fast.
Virtual chicanes.
I hate virtual chicanes, and I have no issue saying that publicly. But some of them are necessary. And I wish we didn't have to use them. I tell all my organizers, a good stage road doesn't need a virtual chicane.
Right.
And I hate to be the person that says we have to talk about putting one on here.
And which comes back to safety. If the road is too open, if the speeds are too high, the risk factor can be too high.
So the one I look at the closest from a safety standpoint is actually median speed, because there can be a certain level of assumption that Subaru is going to build a safe car. They're using top of the line safety equipment.
Right.
Their drivers are professionals. Their crews are professionals. So they're going to take pretty much whatever we throw at them, right?
Right.
So they're considered, but lesser of a fact. Someone like Dave's car, again, decently built car, but not nearly the same measure of safety as, say, Barry's, WRC converted car, Ken's car from last year or the Subaru have.
Yeah.
And so if those were in similar impacts, then the way everything's going to deform or the consequences, if you will, can be different. And so we have to look at it from that side, which is why we look at median, because that's now your, call it, average competitor.
Yeah.
And for us, if it's 65 or above for median speed, we have to review that stage.
Okay.
And that's where we end up using things like virtual chicanes, or there's been stages that we've just said, no, you can't use it.
Right. And we don't have to get too far into the weeds as to the whys, but ultimately what it comes down to is your ability to put on an event. If the event is deemed to be too dangerous and you cannot get the underwriting that you need from insurance, whatever, to put on the event, you can't put on the event. Yeah. So as frustrating as it is from a competitor standpoint to be hearing things about safety and having to tamp speeds down, like this is, I don't envy you in this, because you have to probably juggle, like, well, we have to actually be able to put on the event. Like, probably from your standpoint, that's the overall goal, but then also keeping the competitors happy and safe.
Yeah.
So they can actually go out there and run, and if something should happen, like the chances of it being something catastrophic are as low as physically possible.
Yeah, I mean, I always say any decision I make, there's like 8 people that I have to consider.
Right.
It's sponsors, national competitors, grassroots competitors, events, teams. I mean, there's so many different people that any decision we make affects, that we have to consider all of them. And, whether people agree with the decisions or not, I hope they realize that it's still been considered. It's more of us weighing or balancing which we believe is the right one for the series.
And ultimately to keep the series going. Yeah. That's got to be ultimately the biggest priority.
Well, not even just growing, or going. We want it to grow. We want it to be exciting and fun for people. It's, it's always refreshing for me to go to some of the regional events like I've been to the last couple of weeks, because that's what rally is, right? That's a bunch of us friends going out in the woods and racing.
Yeah.
And that's what got me into the sport, and that's still a very, very important part of the sport. Again, the goals for the grassroots and regional side are always going to be different than the national side.
Right.
And we're not in this situation where we can pay attention to just one or the other. And of course, the national guys think we only pay attention to the grassroots guys, and the grassroots guys think we only pay attention to the national guys, and that's just the nature of the business, I guess.
Sure. Overall, like up to this year, because we're getting into the very tail end of the season of 2023, would you say it's been going reasonably well, like from a grassroots standpoint, as far as like entries and interest in the sport, and like how do you think that is going to move into 2024?
It's one of my priorities taking this role, however many, 3 years ago now, was I feel like the regional championships had lost some of their luster. And everyone was so focused on the national championship, even from a competitor standpoint. What was surprising to me is talking to some, very openly regional competitors that are like, oh yeah, I only go to national events. And it's like, well, why is that? It's like, oh, bang for your buck and mileage and things like that. And so we've been trying to figure out and work towards growing that regional side again. And with that, we've brought on some new events. We've kind of restructured how some of the championships work. And it's been successful in the sense of we've had much better championships within the regional championships and people actually going for regional championships again.
Okay.
And so I'm really excited to see that growth. Even looking to the national championship, while we have a bit of a void at the very top end, our limited championships winner take all at LSPR. And literally winner take all. One of them DNFs, the other wins, but they have to win. So so that's the excitement that I like to see. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, because one of the things we talked about in the last podcast about Subaru calling for more competitors and how the top level of the sport is whatever and who cares and stuff like that. What is your impression of the grassroots? Is there more participation than it was 5 years ago? It sounds like the regional championship kind of revamping stuff is going well. That the two-wheel drive community on the internet is extremely active and hilarious and the best thing since butter bread. Is your kind of global perspective or not global, whatever, like your grander perspective of grassroots rallying, healthy, unhealthy, sustainable? Do you have a plan, like looking forward for more stuff for it? I mean, I'm phrasing this purposely very
No,
broadly.
of course.
Right?
Yeah, it's, for me, there are sometimes it may come off as I'm not putting as much energy towards the regional championships after we've made some of the changes. But part of that is because I do think it's healthy and doesn't need to be messed with. Take the open two-wheel drive class. The only rule in that class, short of some bodywork stuff, is it has to be two-wheel drive.
Yeah.
And that's fantastic. I see no reason to change that, right? Because it creates fun builds, it creates great competition and diversity, and kind of ticks a lot of those boxes. And so while we'll always continue tweaking to make sure that we're getting the entries and things like that, I think it's in a good place, and I don't see much reason to go back to the drawing board or anything like that, like we've kind of done with some of the national classes. But for me, it's really trying to grow the opportunity for those competitors to race. I was just having a conversation with an organizer yesterday, actually, and one thing that is always on my mind is any race car is expensive to build, right? But I can build a track car and go to High Plains every weekend, and so I'm going to be able to use that car a ton. Whereas some of the areas that you live that don't really have rallies within a short distance, you're going to spend all this money to either buy or build a rally car and use it twice a year. And really I want that to change. And that's why we've been trying to grow the number of regional events. That's why we've taken on rally sprints and are trying to get that off the ground, because those are inexpensive avenues for people to race their cars. So and for us, it's from a series standpoint, we haven't had any regional price increases on our end in like 3 years. And we're still fighting to keep that number very low, where, to be honest, we actually lose money on the regional events. But I'm okay with that, because that is how we build that core group of competitors.
Yeah, it's an investment into the community.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, it's so important. I mean, I remember in Colorado, we had Rally Colorado, and we have the Colorado Hill Climb series, which is what Tasso you were talking about in the beginning. And there was a pretty vibrant rally community here. And then when Rally Colorado went away, like there was a lot of those guys that just like all of a sudden now the nearest events for some regional rallies that were, a day's haul away. And a lot of those rally cars and a lot of those enthusiasts just kind of dissipated because, there was not as much opportunity in this area. And so, yeah, I mean, I could see where having a vibrant regional rally series or regional rally community is key, because that's planting the seed so that somebody really gets into it, really likes it, figures it out, builds a good car, whatever, and then decides to go and compete in a couple national events, and then maybe they try and string together a national season or something at some point.
Even during that time, I think we still had a lot of open light cars kicking around Colorado.
Yeah, there's still
a ton of cars in Colorado in general, and Rally Colorado's back obviously and flirting with national status. Yeah. Is that right? So
I mean, I have the opportunity to be on the organizing committee for that, which is great because I still get to organize events. The fun side of it, so we have kind of a plan to get back to national status. So it'll take some work, but I think the group that we've got for that event is very good, and my very biased opinion is it's some of the best roads around. So
yeah. I mean, some of the competitors, that's what they say. It's one of their favorites.
Yeah,
but it's also some of the people that have crashed out. They're like it's one of their least favorites. But
it's a rough car
because it's hard.
Yeah,
but it's challenging.
I've DNF'd the hell out of that rally a couple times. So, not even for crashes, just. It's a car killer of an event. It's definitely a race of attrition. But like I've said, based on nothing other than a hearty appetite for trash talking, is Colorado is the home of rally in this country. The Northwest sits on its laurels, and the Northeast has that East Coast attitude. But Colorado sits here just with the best roads and the best cars and the best ladder for growing skills too, I think.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I think that comes down to the hill climb. I mean, that's how I started. I did hill climbs before I did rallies, and because we got to learn how to write notes, we got to learn how to drive to notes. I mean, that's the opportunity that I want to happen, and whether it's through us or not, it needs to happen.
Well, and the hill climb's a beautiful thing too. Is it's the same stretch of road, so you can actually try things and figure out what works. Like, how can you actually set up the car right, make it faster on these dirt roads that you're driving up, versus like a rally where just everything is changing so much.
It's one and done.
It's harder to figure out, like, did this change actually make a difference? Is it better? Is it worse?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why the rally community in the Pacific Northwest is as big as it is. They have a small one-day, like 40-mile regional event here in a couple weeks, and there's 39 entries.
Wow.
And it's because that area has 4 events every year, anywhere from 5 to 10 testing days that they do, within the different groups, and so when we talk about opportunity to race, they've got it probably better than anyone.
Wow.
Because that's opportunity. Yeah.
No, I'm
but
with you.
because Seattle and Portland are a few hours away, and that's your 2 big hubs, and so you have those active population centers.
Man, if you lived in a space where, say, 2 to 3 hour drive away, it was 4 events.
Right.
I mean,
that's what it is.
All of a sudden,
that's what it is. Yeah.
That becomes so appealing. Like if you like that type of motorsports, if you like driving that type of car, 4 events in the season, I mean, that's a lot.
Yeah. And for a grassroots person, that's usually stretching the budget too.
Right. Can.
Because if you race stuff, you break stuff, and you need to fix stuff. So.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah, it's a hard hit to spend. To do Rally Colorado was about the same prep budget for me as the entire season of hill climbs, including the entry fee and everything like that, right?
Yeah.
And for Rally Colorado, both failures I had were on day 1 and were electrical. So one was an alternator went out, and at least I was able to rejoin day 2.
Yeah.
The second one was an ECU that failed. It just straight up stopped driving one of the coils. Yeah. And so to spend a season's worth of prep time prepping for one event and then have blown the budget for a DNF, it's like, well,
that
screw
is the
this.
Worst.
I'm gonna.
That's 100%.
Well, it's not screw this or whatever, right?
And that's the balance, right? Because I mean, how many miles do you do in a hill climb?
It's like a stage or less, right? It's a short
Colorado's
stage.
130 stage miles,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
it's higher risk, higher reward, right?
Yeah.
So spend the same amount of money, but you do it all in one weekend.
Right. Yeah. So it's not only the same. Yeah. Right. It's relatively close to the same dollar per mile. Yeah. It's just spread out over a summer as opposed to.
And you only have one opportunity to come back versus. The next month or whatever.
Exactly right. I can sometimes get a motor done in between a race if I need to for the hill climbs, but for a rally, I mean, I know people do it, but people are crazy.
Trust me, I did it plenty of times.
There's a lot. There's a lot from one rally to the next. It can be a lot.
When I don't have a crew and it's just me, then it's really hard to get a motor done over the.
But one of the things we were talking about too was like national versus regional, and I mentioned we went to 33 mil restrictors and to hit those targets that we wanted, but now talking with a lot of regional competitors, for them, it's like, okay, I get what you're doing, but I'm not building to the extent of the rules, and I don't want to have to use a 33 millimeter restrictor.
Right. So, I was a fan of the larger restrictor at lower boost option because that caters to me, right? Like as a not crazy restrictor motor builder kind of person.
Yeah, and so actually what we're doing, and we'll announce it here in a couple weeks depending on when this comes out, is we sent out a survey just to gauge people's interest, and so we're going to have a 36 millimeter option. It's going to be at maybe comically low boost because we want it to be to help protect the equipment and the longevity for the people that aren't necessarily trying to go out there and be on that bleeding edge and win. So, okay, you're going to make less horsepower, less boost, but you can still go out there and have fun.
Basically, just turn the boost controller down, if you will.
Yeah, I mean,
and you can still run until you wanted to put in the 33 millimeter restrictor.
What's comically low? Like, if you don't
under
know
one
exactly.
bar. Under 1 bar. Yeah.
Nice.
I'm still waiting on it.
Not too far from where I am.
Yeah, I'm still waiting on a couple of scenarios, but it'll be under 1 bar.
Okay.
Whereas for the 33, it's a bar and a half. And so yes, if you want the fastest car possible, we want it to be clear that the 33 millimeters is the option.
Right.
If you want to protect your equipment, get everything to last a bit longer, that sort of thing, here's that alternative option.
That lets you still run the car.
Right, and that's going to be directed at regional competitors. So from a national standpoint, I don't expect that to change because, the national builds just tend to be more on that bleeding edge and trying to take advantage of every rule. And I didn't want it to become the game of, well, if I do a 36 and do this and that versus do a 33. So it's back to that protecting the competition of the national side while still trying to take care of the grassroots.
So, I mean, this brings up a question that's related to this point, which is when you're making these rules and you're creating these rule sets, how much of a consideration do you have to try and leave a window open for innovation, for somebody that, or and maybe it's not something that you can plan for unless you have an idea of how, if you were a competitor, you could like approach this rule set. What I'm thinking of here specifically is somebody like Sam Albert or maybe Pat Morrow, where they read the rule books and said, wait a minute, what if I put turbocharged small displacement engines out the window and just looked at these naturally aspirated rules? What could I do with it? Mm-hmm. And both of those guys came up with interesting solutions. Mm-hmm. Do you think that that's a priority? Because I think to a certain extent, especially from a grassroots standpoint, having that open, like some open windows for innovation, like that can be the draw for people to come in and build the car in the first place.
Yeah, the tinkerers, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's depending on the rule and things like that, it is a consideration. I think the benefit that Doug Nagy, my technical director, and I have is very recently we were doing everything we could to take advantage of the rules.
Right,
and so
right.
We can still think in that mindset. Still unforeseen things happen. Sam and his Ferrari engine was something that we knew could be exploited, and it was a little bit of well, let's see if anything happens.
Right.
Even with the engine size we have now, there's still a couple engines out there that if someone wanted to spend an obscene amount of money and put a high strung 3.3 cylinder or 3.3 liter in there, maybe we have to look at it again. But I would rather leave the door open for people to look into that kind of stuff, because again, most of the 3.3s out there are perfectly fine, and I don't have issues with it. If someone took a GT2 engine or something and that's a turbo, the GT3 engine, and put it in there, that's when it starts to become a problem.
Right.
But these are edge cases. I mean, Sam, like he said, he Googled the highest horsepower 4.3 or whatever size that engine is,
and then just found it. I mean, it's just like how likely is it for some Ferrari California engine to just be sitting somewhere in a wrecking yard
for a somewhat reasonable price?
Yeah, right.
And that's where back to the discussion of writing rules. We can foresee a lot, but there's still always going to be stuff that we can only be reactionary to, and we want to have that innovation, but at the same time, it's competition and safety that we have to look after.
Right.
And, if someone's going to put a Ferrari engine into something, I want it to happen, but he gets a phone call and we figure out how to make it as fair as possible.
Well, and I think, especially in hearing Sam's side of it, that the encouraging part of that is he had the idea, and you guys were willing to kind of, let him try it out and work with him, and all right, let's see what happens, versus just like shooting the idea down right at the beginning.
Yeah. Well, and like one of the topics that came out, after for him is we had figured out most of the restrictions for him well in advance, but some of it was contingent on we knew he was going to tune it and we knew he was going to dyno it. And so the discussion we had with him is, let's see what power you end up making with this, and then we may have to play with restrictors or throttles or anything like that. But of course, with a lot of things that get skewed, and they didn't even tell him what he was supposed to do until this close to the event, which is fine. But no, it's things like that. We would rather work with a person to help them build something. Yes, we may need to put additional restrictions on it, but there's a reason for that.
Sure.
Is that still referencing back to like a theoretical power to weight in mind for each thing?
Yeah, and because Doug and my mentality has shifted from the previous people that were running the organization, where they were kind of giving special exceptions to different people. Even Pat's car is an example where his was just against the rules, and so they threw the book at him and said, well, fine, you can run up and do this and this. Doug and I have the mentality that if I let Sam do it, I have to let anyone do it. I don't want him to have special permission to do something. So, part of that is publicizing like the restrictions that we do to the different cars and say, hey, if you copy paste this, put it in your car, then you can do that.
Fair and objective.
Right. So, because, if Sebastian Loeb decided he wanted to race a Subaru with a Ferrari engine in it, well, that's going to be a problem. So,
Right, maybe. Yeah. Huh.
Well,
Interesting.
no, that brings up a whole other thought I had about an exhibition class with ARA, where just run what you brung, sign a special waiver.
That's when it comes down to safety. It's the very boring world of insurance is no matter how many waivers you sign, there's always going to be some level of risk, right?
Right.
And if we let somebody do something stupid and don't tell them it's stupid, then we can be held liable.
It's it sucks so much, but it's something I even I come
Trust
across.
me.
Recently we had a guy with a really cool Audi. That's an SCCA Pro Rally car, just with a SCCA Pro Rally spec cage. He's like, hey, I just want to come out and have some fun. It's a turbo 5-cylinder. It sounds sick. Can I come run with you guys? I'm like, God, I wish, right? But like,
it's really strong
that
PVC,
bolted
I
rear
swear.
stay is like, and he even referenced back to like the FIA document from way back in the day that it met and stuff like that. I'm like, I wish, man, but like, if I write you an email that says yes, and then you go crash and kill yourself, and your insurance company, not even your family, your insurance company says, or you're in the hospital for a while, and your insurance company says, we want some of that cost back. Here's this rep here that said yes. I mean, I have a friend from the biking days who crashed riding dirt jumps. He ended up quadriplegic. It's horrible, sad story. Young kid, all this kind of stuff. He was like to the core, like, I'm never gonna sue, bro. Like, our jumps are safe. I'm never gonna sue. It's not up to you, man. Like, your insurance sues. His insurance sued the town where the jumps were, and we got the jump spot shut down for like a decade.
Well, and that's what it is even if your waiver is airtight, how much are the legal battles?
Right.
Yeah. And
they might just out-lawyer you until you give up and settle. Right.
Right. And that is like I said, the unfortunate, but the reality that we live in here in the U.S. is it's a very litigious country, and it's not something that I like to do, but I have to do. So.
Right. And the important is you doing that is what, to some extent, and to a very real extent, is what keeps the sport going. Let's talk
I have
about
a couple questions about Insight. Just to get some, because we've talked about a couple things, kind of like concepts here, and it's such an awesome opportunity to have you here. So that power to weight ratio, as much as you can share, what are you targeting? Do you know off the top of your head, or is that?
I don't remember off the top of my head. I want to say it's 5.6 kilos to horsepower. Again, our metric that we're trying to measure the top class at is the Rally 2 cars.
Okay.
And I forget offhand what it is.
So if you look up a Rally 2's horsepower and then their weight, like, gives you kind of a rough idea for that?
Yeah, and so like for the open class cars, our target is basically low 300 horsepower to the wheels, and with that we expect it to be maybe touching 400 foot-pounds of torque. Okay. So whereas the Rally 2 cars, those are at high 200s, almost the same amount of torque, maybe a touch less, but they're also lighter. So that's the play here, right? Is the Rally 2 cars are at like 1230 kilos, and our open cars are at 1300, give or take.
Okay.
So
cool.
Maybe I should know these up top of my head.
No, I mean,
that's why I carry my rule book around.
A lot of minutia there. That's a lot of numbers.
It's just there's so many things though that you get when you get an opportunity to ask like questions like this and take it from a theoretical subject into like, no, here's what we're actually thinking. I think it's a cool opportunity.
But that's also only one piece of that puzzle, right?
Sure.
That's a place to start, but then that's when you look at things like aerodynamics and suspension and the opportunities for speed there. So.
Curious then too with the aerodynamic changes. You talked about only having really one kind of race worth of data from Subaru and Rally Safe and all this kind of stuff. How much did you actually see the Subaru slow down from the previous generation? Again, as much as you can share kind of some of that data here.
I can look compared to last year. And from a top speed and average speed standpoint, I think they're about 4% slower. Okay. Which is in line with what we'd expect. Is
that time per mile or horsepower or mile per hour? Kind of that
I mean,
metric?
They would be about the same, but typically I'm looking at I look at miles per hour, but then it is the decrease in seconds per mile is typically what I'm looking at for comparisons.
Okay. Cool.
So and we wanted them about a second to a second and a half a mile an hour slower per mile.
And you're seeing that pretty similar to a Rally 2's pace, obviously driver for driver never being equal and stuff like that. But
it's I have, because of some of the relationships I have, I can get some of the data and performance from Rally 2 cars internationally, and so I have a call it theoretical idea of what those cars should perform on our stages, and I think that's the hard thing looking at. Again, Brandon's had very good performance, but looking at it from that theoretical standpoint, a top Rally 2 driver, say we pulled someone from WRC2, should be pretty darn close. maybe there's tweaks that need to be done here and there, but I can't do it confidently because I don't have that finite data.
So do you think in the next, let's say 2 years, 24 season, 25 season, do you think we're going to see somebody come over from Europe, even if it's just to test the waters in an event or two?
I think there's a pretty reasonable chance of that. Again, I've been having quite a few conversations, and it's hard and it's frustrating because I feel like we're right there, and I just need someone to take the jump and show how truly or far away it really is. And I've been hopefully very transparent throughout this process of this is our goal. We want Rally 2 and we want Open here. I have no issues making changes to Open class if we have to get to that point. And whether it's working with Subaru directly to make changes to their car, or if it's class wide, that's what I want to do, and that's what needs to happen. So
is there some, because we've talked about before, and I've heard it before other places too, about how the kind of normal U.S. rally stage suits our Open class more than a Rally 2, just due to things like wheelbase and stuff like that. Is there
yes and no. I did an interesting dive into some of the ERC data, so the European Rally Championship, just because it's more relevant to what we do here in the U.S. than it would be, say, to the WRC, because they do have more gentleman drivers, if you will, some professionals, so kind of similar to what we have. And from a average speed standpoint, we're actually right in line with them. But again, talent, machinery is always the equation there.
Types of roads? Do you think that there's like...
Yeah, I mean, I was surprised because, I've heard the same thing. Oh, the European roads are slower and this and that. And yeah, sure, there are some. But with our inclusion of some of the events like Southern Ohio and events like that, it has lowered, say, the average speed across the series. We still have some fast events. But so does the ERC. I mean, there was an ERC event that was at like high 60 mile an hour average speed for the winter. And that's getting closer in line with what we have.
Is there a higher tarmac to gravel ratio over there than there is over here? Similarly?
I mean, they have more. We have none.
Right.
But when I looked at the ERC, when I did the comparison, I think there's only one tarmac event. So.
Interesting.
Yeah. So that means somebody in Europe that's watching this should bring over their Rally 2 car and give it a go.
Everybody in Europe.
Everybody in Europe.
Podcast.
The entirety of
the
the
most
Rally 2
popular
community.
rally podcast in Europe. Yep. So that's us.
Shocking statistics.
Yeah, you heard it here first, people.
One question I had for you, President, just from an ARA standpoint, like what would it mean to the ARA if, like, say you have Subaru as a manufacturer. What if you had two manufacturers? What if you had Hyundai or Toyota or somebody else?
Yeah.
Just two manufacturers that were at the pointy end of the class or something like that. Do you think that would be a boon to the ARA, or I mean, if there is such a significance in the regional rallies and stuff, is it something that maybe that wouldn't be as much of a game changer?
I mean, it's different measuring sticks we're talking about again, right? It's from a competition standpoint, absolutely, because then if we had someone to measure against Subaru, similar budget wise at least, then theoretically the competition, at least between those cars, should be closer. And I think we saw what Ken did last year with yes, it was a privateer, but obviously very good supporting and funding. He was able to go toe-to-toe against the Subaru, and it came down to winner-take-all at LSPR and was one of the most exciting championships we've had. Ken himself told me, this is not sustainable, I'm doing it for this year and that's it.
Right.
So that was an issue in itself, and also pointing to the cost of the runaways, or the runaway cost of the cars. But from a marketing perspective, that would be a huge benefit to have another manufacturer.
Would that be the biggest benefit, do you think?
So.
Well, having close competition, but then that would also then parlay into just a huge marketing boon for the sport.
Yeah. I think it's underestimated what marketing dollars can do to help the sport. Yes, I don't cut a check to the grassroots guys to do it, but that gives me the ability to bring things like Rally Safe over, which is universally been accepted and now wanted by competitors. I'm getting big pushes to regional events, but the issue is it's expensive. It's a premium system with a premium price tag.
Right.
And if we did not have good funding, or at least the funding we have now, I don't know if I call it good, but some amount of funding for the series, I couldn't afford to do things like that.
Right.
And maybe not a believer in trickle-down economics, but on a rally scale, there's a certain level of that happening where, you know, the program Subaru has for discounted entries for, you know, for competitors, that goes a long way for people's budgets.
Sure.
So there's a lot of ways that, even if it wasn't a manufacturer, but say we had some big company, I mean, Hoonigan's an example where we get a pretty big marketing hit, you know, with Hoonigan, where we're then more valuable as a series, can get better sponsorship, better funding, and then in turn provide more services to the competitors. So
Right.
at the end of the day, yes, we want to try and keep costs and everything low. And so if I didn't have Rally Safe covered, you know, in part by sponsorship, then I don't know if I could have it because it would price entry fees too high.
Right.
So.
Because it seems like marketing is one of the greater challenges. I mean, when you talk about regional events, like probably, I would guess that in the majority of the places where these regional events are happening, most of the non-motorsports people in that area probably would not be any the wiser that something is going on that weekend.
On the bright, I mean, or worse, they could be against it.
Well,
Yeah.
or yes, for sure,
always
for
that.
sure.
Yeah.
But like I'm thinking here of like what Dirtfish has been doing, where they've been going out on their own and they've been kind of documenting the rallies to get content out. That one of the things that I think about rally here in the States is that if, you know, we're here in Colorado, there's an event that's happening halfway across the country, and you can't physically be there. Like there's a challenge to even like get like a good sense of what's going on and to get excited about the competition that might be happening up front. Would you say that like, how big of a challenge is that for the ARA? Like, do you think that's one of the bigger hurdles that you guys have to climb? Or
It is, and I mean, transparently, it's been a weak point for us too. You know, we have not done a good job of marketing and bringing awareness to events on a larger scale. And yes, we still have a partnership with Dirtfish, and they do a pretty good job of doing that. But they're also only really reaching rally fans. And we're missing a big segment of motorsport fans that don't know about rally. I always say that rally is the greatest motorsport no one's heard about, at least here in the U.S.
Right.
And again, we haven't done a good job for it. And you know, we tried to do some live streaming this year, and the difficulty for that type of format is we race in the middle of nowhere.
No, it's extremely hard.
Yeah.
Extremely hard sport to document on film or keep up with like that. Like whether you're spectating or trying to film it and release some sort of video about it.
But it's also really easy to make cool. I mean, it's cars sideways in the dirt.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
you know, I think live streaming is one part of the answer. You know, more traditional media like Dirtfish is doing is another part. People are always, you know, I mean, ourselves included, are always trying to chase you know, some sort of syndicated broadcast or whatever the case is, which is still going away, or which is kind of going away. But when we have conversations with companies, the first thing they ask is, "What channel are you on?"
Right.
Wow. You know, and that's still a very relevant topic for them.
To this, like this is something I was thinking about the other day as I was sitting there on the exercise bike killing time. I was watching YouTube videos of another sport that's extremely hard to film and document, which is enduro moto, right? Because it is essentially a stage rally on a dirt bike. And I thought that they had a really cool solution for it. They have like staff riders for the, you know, this one guy, Patty, and they call it Patty Cam, and they just stick him out on the course, and as riders come by, it's a lot less regimented than a stage rally. It's not one car at a time
casual,
or whatever, right? As a guy went by, he would hop in behind him and be like, "Oh yeah, this is Joe Schmo with so-and-so team. Let's see what he's doing." And he would just like ride behind him for a while, as long as it wasn't too dusty. You'd be like, "Oh man, he's really feeling it. He must be on one. Oh yeah, he almost lost it there." And then something would happen. He'd either kind of time out with that person or something would get in the way. He'd pull off and wait for the next person, and he'd hop in there behind it. So I started thinking about like how to adapt that to, because almost my entire life has been difficult sports to communicate to someone or to make exciting to someone, or, you know, whether it's downhill mountain biking, moto stuff, you know, the race car stuff now, even hill climbing is a point-to-point race now. We're not, you know, in an arena just driving around in a circle. So they're extremely difficult sports to market, and as a result, they're extremely difficult sports to find support as a competitor for. If, you know, essentially you think about competitors as being just driving billboards.
Well, it's from an advertising standpoint, you've got to entice the advertiser or the company to advertise with you, because you have to show them like how many views you're going to get.
Well,
how
that
much
needs to
watch
start
you're
with
gonna
us.
Right.
I mean, the more views, clicks, whatever we get,
Right.
Obviously, then you would be able to leverage. I was just having a conversation with a competitor a couple days ago. I was putting a program together for next year, and before, for whatever reason, ARA never really shared any of that marketing data.
Oh.
And so he reached out to me and said, "Do you have some numbers you can share?" And I sent him what I have, and whether they're good or not, they're at least something for him to talk about. So.
Having that package available to competitors is extremely valuable because it saves so much time putting together, sponsorship decks and stuff like that, trying to bring to support. You can say, "Hey, I'm running with ARA. Here are their numbers," and it's just you just drop a PDF on them.
Yep. And that's with our final national event being in a couple weeks here. That's what we're going to do at the end of the year, is be able to create, even if it's a one-page elevator pitch, but enough data that our competitors can then take that and use it as leverage to have those conversations. Because right now, I was in this position very recently as a competitor of it's a best guess and whatever my page does.
So. Right.
And that's, you talk about supporting grassroots motorsports, that may be like one of the lowest key but most effective ways of supporting those people. And so I think that's super cool you're doing that.
Well, and things are shifting so quickly. You're shifting away from broadcast television to streaming and to YouTube and all that sort of thing. Like, honestly, like probably within the next couple of years, maybe even now, like these advertisers, if they're asking, well, what channel are you on? Like,
it's outdated.
Yeah,
company.
when you figure it out, you come back and then here's all our
Yeah.
streaming data and all that. But
That's why I was surprised to still be having those conversations.
yeah,
I mean, you look at F1, the largest motorsport in the world. Yeah, they're still on a bunch of TVs, but arguably their most lucrative assets, their app.
well,
or Netflix.
well,
Yeah, trying to
it's
survive.
Netflix, but the app is
Yeah.
ridiculous. I have that. I'm guessing you have it as well.
Oh, yeah.
Like that, if it's I'm sure it's insanely cost prohibitive to do, but like that is absurd. Like the access that gives you for people at home. I won't dwell on it, but basically you have an app on your phone or your iPad or whatever, and hey, a race happened or a race is happening. I want to watch the race. You just open the app and you can watch the race. You can start it from the beginning.
Yep.
You can do whatever. You can actually watch the camera from any car that you want. You
But
can hear
still a
very
sport.
certain commentary.
Where you can see the whole race
But they
from
do
a
the
handful of
WRC.
cameras.
Yeah.
And they have a really robust like streaming from the car kind of capability, right? Like
All it takes for the WRC to do it is helicopters and planes in the air.
Yeah, exactly.
With antennas
Uh-huh.
and remote antennas set up to
WRC
different places
satellites
so they
and-
have connectivity.
Uh-huh.
Preston, drones are getting bigger and better.
That's
I'm
true.
thinking
So-
that there's
I
gonna be
actually looked at a proposal for a drone mesh network. I kid you not.
Yeah.
And
You know
and
what?
it was
What
very interesting in theory.
What about hot air balloons? Like maybe
There you
hot air
go.
balloons
That's
would be
pretty
cheaper.
inexpensive.
Yeah.
You just can't control exactly where they're going to
And you're
be.
trying to figure out why you're burning down forests and hanging up hot air balloons
Right.
places.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh,
You talk about drones though, and you were asking, footage. It's like if you have a chase cam,
Mhm.
there's a chase cam as a drone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're still limited in range, but it's getting better. And I'll tell you, the footage we get from drones is so cool.
It's insane.
So good.
If you
It's
had like
completely
3
changed how
drones
you
that
shoot
could
it.
follow each car, or like the
Yeah.
first 20 cars through a stage.
Yeah, at a couple of our national events this year when we had the live streaming, we did have a couple of drone cams that were a series of 3 corners and then zip back and catch the next car. And so we tried to use that concept, but it's extremely expensive for any type of production, and for the budget that we had dedicated to it, it just wasn't a very good product, and that's why we kind of had to go back to the drawing board and we're trying to get a concept together for next year to bring back live streaming, because again, I think that's at least one answer that we need to have, but again, it is shockingly expensive.
Even if it's a live stream in Parc Fermé or Parc Exposé at the end of the day or something like that, so you can have an interviewer walk around, talk to competitors, and maybe like have B-roll of the car on the stage, but then tell the story at the end of the day or at the award ceremony.
And I think a lot of that is the interviewer is entertaining, because this is another thing to go to downhill racing, and something that's really helped downhill like mountain biking and its exposure to people is these current or recently ex-competitors doing very lighthearted, very much off the company line, off the script, asking the questions that you probably shouldn't ask a polite person. and that's been a really successful. If you look at like, for anybody that watches downhill out there, like Win TV and Jack Moyer and Ed Masters and these guys, they're very entertaining people. And they go up and ask the racers, like, what the hell were you thinking about that one? And stuff like that. And, I'm just having a bad day, huh? Oh, that was my best. Oh, yeah, well, maybe do better, huh? So,
well, because they're recent competitors, they
have
can
it.
speak intelligently about the sport. Yeah.
Exactly, and they have that relationship with those people. And this is a thing, like Duplessis, I think, was very entertaining.
And we had Texas Dave this year. Dave was rally ready, and again, similar, very lighthearted and off the cuff comments, but still can speak intelligently.
Relevant, right? Fun but relevant.
All right. So this brings me to one question. WRC. So there's two parts. But the first part is, so there's been rumors of a race coming back to the States. We're getting a WRC race. How much do you know? What do you know? What can you say?
I mean, it's a very real group trying to put it together. Yeah. So it's Rally USA. They're based in Tennessee. And so they're looking around the Chattanooga area to put on an event. They've done a couple of test days and some kind of PR stuff. But, from our end, as being a member of ACUS, we're involved in kind of the back end. And ultimately, we'll work with the FIA to bring an event here. And there's just kind of a checklist, if you will, that group has to work through. And I know everyone wants it right now, and I want to race, and I want to go to a WRC event, but it is a process because it's an area that hasn't put on an event in a very long time. It is a relatively new group. Much of that group hasn't put on rally events in a while. They're working with, let's say, experienced consultants or experienced group, but we need to get them to build up a little bit. Is what it comes down to.
Do you think it's likely?
Yeah, I think so. I still think that there's a very reasonable chance for it to happen.
Okay.
There's been enough false starts, if you will, of getting WRC back in the U.S. that I'm cautiously optimistic. But again, it is difficult to put on FIA events in the U.S. in general, and that is unfortunately a barrier that they're going to have to work through. So.
Do you think if we could get that top level of rally, even for one event in the States, that it would be kind of like when Formula One came back, where all of a sudden it gets just enough interest because that would probably get played on like your television stations or whatnot.
I don't think it's that easy. I mean, if you think about F1 came back to Austin in 12 years ago.
Yeah.
And we're really just seeing
Drive to Survive,
in the last few years. Drive to Survive is what got the general public into it. And, I talked before about Dirtfish does a very good job of catering to rally fans.
Yeah.
Rally fans are passionate. They're going to find a way to watch and learn about rally one way or the other. But you need the people to stumble upon rally to get interested in it. And that's where things like Drive to Survive or more approachable content comes in, because I mean, to be honest,
it's catching the people that for some reason get grabbed that would normally have no interest in motorsports
or
in
have
general.
no idea about it. So, or the F1 fans that don't know about rally, or the Indy fans, or whoever, or single track guys, whatever it is. Rally is an interesting sport, and it's a viable product from a marketing standpoint, but there's just not enough eyeballs on it.
Yeah. It has at times been a competitor for with Formula One as the top motorsport, right?
Yeah.
It has WRC. The drama. It has the WRC has obviously not
us.
Yeah. Nice. Someday.
Well, not that the competition.
I said realistic goals.
I always aim for this guy. That way you end up in the moon.
Yeah.
So I had no point to make there other than it's sick, and people should watch more of it.
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, I think what Subaru is doing with launch control, it helps. The problem is it's just them. Yeah. You're not.
I can't watch launch control anymore though, and I'm like, I love everyone doing the sport. I don't want to cut anybody down, but stop talking about like you're the underdog and we got all these challenges we got to overcome and stuff like that.
I have to realize it's a marketing exercise.
It is
right?
absolutely.
Yeah.
I get it, right? But it's and it's something I've talked about before is how this country loves its underdog stories, and so you have to play that game if you want anyone to watch your thing.
Yeah.
But I would love to watch, like, no, we're the dominant competitor. Here's all the ways that we've gotten to where we are.
Why we're the best.
Like, why are we the best? Like, I would love
Yeah.
Mercedes for the last couple or the last decade before the last 2 years or 3 years, whatever. I want to watch their documentary, not McLaren. Like we fired a guy, maybe we'll get another guy, right? Like,
Right.
I want to watch Mercedes be like, no, we dominated as hell. Here's why. Or Subaru being like, we dominated as hell. Here's why. And I would watch that launch control again, but right now I can't watch it anymore.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like, we have supply chain issues. I hope we make it to the event. Who cares, man?
The new
like,
World Series was so interesting to me, just because I was intimately familiar with it, from the other side of it.
You were on the other side of the phone call for a lot of those things.
Okay.
You're like,
yeah.
this is what they were. Okay.
My wife was laughing at me, Sonny, but because on one of the episodes they're like, we just had a phone call with ARA, and so I was like, I was in the office for that.
Yeah.
Man.
Yeah.
Sorry, I signed some NDAs, but she works in the office too.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and I mean, I think really what it is, it's the story of all of the competitors, and that's I think what Drive to Survive picked up on in work is that there's 20 drivers in the field and 10 teams, and they're talking about here's the story of each driver and the teams, and I don't think even they realize how engaging if you just told the story of what's going on in the background.
It's the people. The average. I would say the average motorsport fan, they don't care what turbo's on the car or what compression they run the engine, but the interesting story
of
but the people
drama,
the people to do, and the fact that Netflix for whatever reason was able to catch these people to like, I'm an engineer, I actually really care about the builds of the cars, I could care less who wins on Sunday. All of a sudden, like now you're catching all of these different demographics by going to the background story and letting the races happen. And then here, like after all of that has happened, and you know who's won the championship if you care at all, or spend 2 seconds on Google. Here's how that all happened. Here's all the stuff that you didn't know was going on in the background.
Yeah. I wonder how much of a budget and support benefit differential there was for Drive to Survive from a low-level team versus a Mercedes or a Red Bull or whoever else now at the top. I don't know. I wonder if like a Williams got, a 400%, or just come out of nowhere number, 400% benefit in budgetary stuff, whatever, from Drive to Survive's exposure. Where otherwise they were just like, oh, poor Williams, remember they used to be good? But now there's a human story behind it and millions and tens and probably, 100 million views of whatever Drive to Survive pulled or something like that, right? So
yeah, there's really not a small Formula One team. I mean, there are lower budget Formula One teams, but I mean, I think they all got...
There's huge differences, though. I mean,
well, but I'm talking in terms of coverage on the show. Like, I think they talk to everybody, and because drivers hop around from
some
team to
said
team.
no.
Well,
at first,
yeah.
Then
don't
they
think
realize
Verstappen-
you got to get on the train. Yeah.
I don't think Max will ever get
Trains leaving the station, whether or not you're on it. You might as well get on
I
the top.
remember seeing some statistic where at one point McLaren's catering budget was more than half the budget for some of the teams.
Well, I think it might have been, that was back in the heyday. Yeah, Ferrari and McLaren. Yeah. It was...
and maybe that was just them hiding some of the budget in catering, but...
Yeah, right.
Like now with budget caps, maybe they're like, I don't know, steak's expensive. So
Right.
Independence Day, the movie, right? Where the guy's like, what do you think it costs $200 for a cheeseburger?
Yeah,
and $300 for whatever? Yeah, exactly that. Independence Day quote.
Right, so as we're landing here at the end, the one other question I have to ask, because as we're recording this, now it's come out, there's been all this discussion about Subaru returning to the WRC. So, because you're a rally person, obviously, and a Subaru person, what are your thoughts about the possibility of Subaru returning to the WRC?
I think it's very small.
Yeah.
And only because I know maybe a little more than most about how the FIA works. I mean, the WRC teams are unhappy with the FIA and the WRC promoters more than most people think. And so I think they're at a bit of a precipice. But the reality is, as of right now, the engine or the builds of the cars are much closer to spec than they are individual manufacturers.
Right.
Yes, Toyota builds their own engine. Yes, Hyundai builds their own engine. But they're all 1.6 liters and have pretty specific restrictions on them.
Yeah, it's a really focused rule.
Exactly. And even when we talk about the hybrid systems, I mean, I know there's been quite a bit of outcry from the teams because it's not their systems. It's a spec system that's given to them. Well, they pay for it, but it's given to them to use. And so I would struggle to see why a more boutique manufacturer like Subaru would want to completely change everything they have about their cars to get back into the WRC.
Yeah.
Of course, I'd love to see it there.
Well, it's and because all of that stuff is so specified and it's nothing like what Subaru has, like what would be the benefit to Subaru? I mean, that's my biggest question. Is yes, I think honestly the FIA wants it's kind of a similar problem. They want to have 3 or 4 manufacturers. Absolutely. They don't want it to just be between two groups because yes, at least there it's a flip of a coin, but really getting more parity. 3 or 4 teams in there that are.
Well, it shows a healthier series, and I think that radiates back to us too. But on the WRC level, it's seeing the rumors about Subaru pop up every now and again, and I know Ben Salami talked with them in whatever race that was, and I think there will always be some level of interest, but WRC is expensive, and Subaru is not actually that large of a car manufacturer.
Right.
And so weighing the cost analysis, I don't see the numbers necessarily adding up.
Yeah, with everything in the world now compared to even 2008, in the last year when they were running, I bet you it's way more expensive now to run WRC than it was then. Yeah. Just with shipping costs and.
Yeah. I mean, it's like talking about bringing a race here in the U.S.
Yeah.
Part of the discussion is they have a European set team and they have a flyweight team. Mm-hmm. With different containers and pit setups and all of that, and so you effectively have 2 full setups that you send to different parts of the world, and then the cars fly to the events. So, I mean, any motorsport on that scale is expensive.
Yeah.
But I struggle to see how it's relevant to Subaru today. Yeah. So they've obviously it's a successful marketing program for them here in the U.S. or they wouldn't still be doing it, but. The global audience of Subaru, I think, is just a little bit different.
Yeah.
It'd be, a passion project.
It would be, yeah.
Look at, what Ken Block did.
Yeah.
It was due to the passion would be the only reason that Subaru would get back into it. And so that
Subaru's
takes...
so conservative of a company.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. It takes...
And you're talking about, like...
Moving mountains.
Passion projects, I think it was being kind of like the small thing over here on the side versus like that at the WRC level. I mean, that would just be a crazy
it's like,
spin.
maybe if they talked about doing a Rally 2 car, but again, the rules as of today don't allow that. And, even more so on a Rally 2 car, they don't have a vehicle that fits that car.
Right.
They're all 2-door hatchbacks. And, at least on the Rally 1 side, they allow you to have a custom body, and I think it's up to 75% size change or something like that.
Right.
But
so it would be a
we can make it fit.
Yaris with badges.
Yeah, or a cross-track with a couple less doors.
Yeah,
sure. Right. Oops.
One actual door, one tape line door.
Maybe like an extra cab door.
Yeah, there you go.
Right.
The old Veloster door.
Yeah.
So I would love to see it, but I don't see it being realistic. And maybe they choose to prove me wrong, and since obviously they didn't prove anything to me, but maybe a joint venture with Toyota for something or something. I don't know.
I mean, if it's just getting another team, so at least you've got 3 teams, but it's really 2.5, and then maybe Toyota foots part of the bill. But
I mean, they already kind of have junior programs for that, though. So if they were just going to do a badge swap, then there's nothing stopping them from doing that today.
Well, Toyota has a vested interest in Subaru.
Yeah.
So
they're 10%.
20.
Oh, 20. Okay.
Yeah, But at the same time, like there's all these discussions that we're getting little whispers of in the background that Subaru's wanting to distance themselves or separate themselves from Toyota. So like maybe Toyota wants to do it, but actually Subaru is not so interested in it.
Sure.
It's complicated. I don't know. I'm curious to see how it plays out. I honestly hope that they don't do it because of how much money it would just eat up.
Right.
And what else if they put all of that budget in that, where it just seems like it would not be really relevant in many ways.
Yeah.
What else could they do with even a fraction of this budget that would be hugely beneficial?
Like they scrapped an STI because they said that they're moving away from that kind of side of it and combustion engines and maybe if they have a situation where they can make a hybrid kit relevant or something and have it in the STI and a WRC car, then maybe, but that's a long stretch.
Yeah. It's like if they would go back into the WRC, but then that puts a complete kibosh on any kind of performance platform that's available to us, to the public, because now all they can do is focus on the cars that make the money, like the Foresters and the Outbacks. I think we as enthusiasts would lose far more by not having a platform that we could go out and buy, even if we could go and watch them race, in the series.
That's the WRC it's just like Formula One, where the road going cars are not as relevant to the sport anymore. They're space age chassis and one-off bodies, and in this weird way, the Rally 2 cars have become more relevant to the road going cars, because they have to run OEM turbos and OEM based engines, and so those are much truer to the mentality of rally, which for a long time was real cars, real roads, real fast.
We're coming to the end of the podcast, so we can't dive into this. But this is why I think that Subaru should be running a production-based race car here in the States, not this completely bespoke, custom-built car. Because, really, Subaru, if you want it to be relevant to what we can, as enthusiasts, can go out there and buy, you've got to be running the car or something that's at least close-ish to the car that we can go out and buy. Yeah. Like if you're not running the car that's relevant to what we have and what we're using, then it's just like the relevance goes down really fast. And if it's like so far modified as it is now, it kind of looks the same, and that's it. Yeah. Like just none of the technology, none of the engine, none of the suspension, none of that is applicable.
The fact they're still running an EJ engine says volumes, doesn't it? It's
well, not necessarily. But if they were running FAs, then all of a sudden I think people would think of the FAs in a different way.
Some translation.
There would be a lot more interest in it, and it would probably speed up the development, because if from a motorsport standpoint they're working with all these top level companies to develop valves, turbos, cams, whatever. Yeah. At some point, some of that would trickle down, and power in general is complicated now. Mm-hmm. So the chances of all that being relevant is less, but at least there's a chance. Yeah. But when they're basically using old WRC engines that have almost no parts in common with even the EJ engines that we know, that trickle down, it just doesn't really exist.
I got the answer. I've just been sitting here for the last 5 minutes thinking about it.
Okay.
Subaru spec class.
Yeah.
A GD or a GC, I don't have that part figured out yet. Like a spec kit you buy, like the Clio Cup kits and stuff like that in Europe and stuff. So you get a GD or GC Cup kit.
Or just a new 23.
I can't afford one of those. You can't afford an old GC or GD, right? You get a Cup kit for, call it $10,000, and you have incentivized entry fees and a Cup class, like a whatever, call it the SCI
not a bad
Cup,
idea.
or the whatever.
That's what they're doing in Australia right now.
Yeah, right.
Well, not with the old cars, with the newer cars.
Yeah. But it's still the cost of the newer car would still be exclusive for me on something like that.
Yeah, here's the thing, I can tell you, running a national program, a relatively small national program, was $250,000. Yeah. And so what's an extra $20,000 for?
Yep.
but that makes it a whole different program. But at least that would be more attainable than like trying to build one of these like open class cars for most more.
A really robust media deck that you could hand out to people to actually get that support, and sure, do the new car and call it the WRX Cup.
Yeah.
Rally Cup.
Well, and Subaru tried that. I know we're trying to shut it down here, but Subaru tried that 5 or 6 years ago when the 15 came out, when that body style came out.
Yeah.
And it was like $25,000 to the winner of that series.
That was incentivized for the model, though. They didn't actually offer product, though, to create that car, right? So I think if you had if it was a package, right, you got your suspension, your wheel and tire package, your interior kit.
Yeah. Honda offered that.
Yeah.
Pretty recently,
that's
too.
true. Yeah. And Honda has had a lot of, I don't know, from the outside looking in, my impression is that Honda's been, the Honda drivers are having a good time in rally.
So, and this is now getting off topic, but...
and we're trying to...
I know. Yeah. So I'll tell you, the Honda group is actually really a passion project by some of the engineers.
Right.
With some support from Honda, it's not a Honda program.
Yeah.
Okay. Again, passion projects are what keep it going.
But that's like how those guys bring the Hondas and the Anchors out to Pikes Peak as well.
Yeah, that's true. And it's a lot of the same guys.
Yeah.
So James, Robinson competed in Rally. I competed against for many years. So.
Yeah.
And he had air conditioning And I was faster, and it was like, who's actually winning here?
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
As I did Rally Colorado in my car with absolutely no ventilation, and my wife's shoes melted off. Like the soles melted off of her shoes on the floor, and I'm sitting there heat stroking, pouring water down my back.
Yeah.
And those guys rolling down their windows. You guys need any water?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Different priorities. Yes.
Different priorities.
Well, I hate to say it, I do have to end it here. But thank you very much for watching. Thanks, Preston, for coming down. Thanks, Tasso, for coming down and having the time. What this might mean is that, I don't know, at some point in the near future, maybe we should just broach that topic. Because that is a deep one. Cars and the build, or what could be done to entice more people to come into rally.
Mm-hmm.
But
it's ARA's fault more people aren't doing it.
Absolutely.
So,
My fault,
yeah.
specifically.
Specifically Preston.
I'm going to need a check from you.
No, I told you I'm not cutting checks and grassroots guys.
No.
Oh, man. Well, so make sure you check out Dirtfish, ARA. Check out what's going on out there. Check out these regional rallies, because there's a lot of really cool things. Thanks so much for watching. Thanks for your support as always. Until next time, stay tuned to Flatirons Tuning. Thanks everyone for tuning in to the Flatirons Syndicate Motorsports Podcast. Once again, we'd like to let you know that your support is what makes this show possible. Be sure to check out our online store at flatirons.com for any of your aftermarket or OEM Subaru parts needs. And as always, stay tuned with Flatirons Tuning.